Welcome back to Farrand Friends Friday. I'm Karen Waltuck, the horticulturist of the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association in Hyde Park, New York. This week we got an interesting question from one of our viewers wanting to know more about the vines in the Beatrix Farrand Garden. So we invited back former horticulturist Ann Sims to talk about those historic plants and also to give us a little bit more information about the use of vines in other Beatrix Farrand designs. Don't forget, if you have a question or suggestion about other topics we might discuss in future videos, send us an email at info@beatrixfarrandgarden.hydepark.org.
So the early restoration of the garden, there was a lot of infrastructure still in place here. The walls were intact, and along the walls were these upright locust planks that were original to the 1912 garden. There's a trellising system. Her design for the trellising system is beautifully documented in her archive at the University of California, Berkeley. And she actually used the same trellising system that we have on the walls here at Belfield in a number of gardens. It consists of these locust uprights, and then the horizontal pieces are just simply made with bamboo. And so that was the system that she designed for this garden, and luckily there were enough of these original locust pieces, that being a very hard wood that lasts for years and years, that when the garden was being restored, we actually found the locust pieces stacked in the basement, and the National Park Service had the foresight to actually remove them and store them so that they would be maintained over time. And it was really exciting to be able to put the uprights back in place, and then to just buy crops of new bamboo that we have to replace every few years as they rot. But it's a very simple system, and it's something that I think people could use in their own gardens if they have a wall or a part of a building that they would want to trellis vines along. Now, the vines in this garden, I don't think we have any evidence that these were planted by Farrand or were specified in particular by Farrand. There's no documentation to that, but we do, there are all these vines that are growing here were growing in the garden when we started the restoration in the early 90s. And as you see, there's amazing wisteria growing. It had gotten so overgrown that at the very beginning we just did basically rejuvenation pruning, where we just cut everything to the ground. And then it took a number of years to get them pruned and trellised up so that they would bloom, because they really like to be pruned hard. If you just let them grow and grow and grow, wisteria just works on vegetation, and if you try to bring in the vegetation through pruning, you can get a lot more bang for your buck with the blossoms. And then the other vine that was here, which is also a vigorous grower, is the Akebia quintata, and it's the five-leaf Akebia is its common name, and it's a lush, beautiful, semi-evergreen vine. It's has this very tiny foliage, more textured foliage, much smaller than the wisteria. So it's very lush and delicious along the trellising, but it's so vigorous that it gets really thick, and it's so exuberant that it tends to kind of take over. And what we found in the research on Farrand is that she was really particular about pruning, and while she was interested in vines covering architecture and softening lines of architecture, she was also really keen to have the strong lines of architecture evident, and that the vines should work within the overall structure. So I think, for example, her notes at Dunbar Oaks say you want to maintain a clear vision of the coping stone on top of the wall. So that's something that we do in this garden it's kind of an ongoing process, but to try to just keep it trimmed right up underneath that stone, coping the top stone so that we can really see the structure underneath, and then let the columns also stand out to ground the structure. So one of the key characteristics of Beatrix Farrand's designs is that she often incorporated what we now think of as vertical gardening. And there's a whole wonderful modern trend about, these gorgeous gardens that are climbing up walls with all different types of plants. And it's something that she used, especially in her campus designs at Princeton and at Yale and Oberlin. She was really keen on using a wide variety of plants. So not just Boston ivy. In fact, she didn't really like Boston ivy so much, and she much preferred dark green English ivy. And then she also planted a whole series of flowering trees, Magnolia grandiflora, which is the southern magnolia, growing up along a building and then pruned really tight against the building so that it became a covering. And she used it almost like a mosaic of different types of vines and shrubs and trees to clothe the walls of buildings. She felt on a campus, it should really be about highlighting the architecture of the building and lots of open space and easy circulation for the students. But it was a trend of this vines growing on walls in the early part of the 20th century. And there had been a very romantic notion based on a lot of images of Italian villas that were often in ruins and just overgrown with vines. And so she loved that romantic notion, but her approach was much more restrained and much more honoring the architecture and the clean lines. She felt that if the vines got out of control, your eye would lose touch, and so you wouldn't have anything to ground you when you came upon a design. So we try in this garden to keep her spirit alive by tackling those vines and keeping them in check. So she used a number of the vines that we have in this garden in her designs for Dunbar Oaks in Washington, D.C. And what's so lucky about the designs at Dunbar Oaks is that she made careful notes of instruction on how to maintain the designs, and was quite specific about the vines. There were wisteria vines growing on the conservatory, Dunbar Oaks, and she was adamant that those be kept in tight control on the building, never to cover the windows, and again, that creates more prolific bloom. There was also a kibia growing at Dunbar Oaks, and again, same instruction. So it's wonderful that we have all of her thoughts and clear guidance about how to maintain properties. It's something that she was quite brilliant about. She would create a design, but not just walk away, but to always think in a very long-range, thoughtful way about how it could be maintained and how it could endure in the future.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have any other questions or suggestions about what we might talk about in future weeks, be sure to send us an email at info@beatrixfarrandgarden.hydepark.org. We'll see you next week. Thanks again.